Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your 2017 MIC Conference Master of Ceremonies, Tim Gard.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Did you have a good time yesterday? Yeah. In my Comic Vision seminars, I tell people that our days are a series of good and bad things. When something good happens, you go, woohoo! Try that. Now, you could do better than that. When you're having fun, when you celebrate a moment, you go, all right. So when something good happens, you do what? When something bad happens, you put your hand right here and you say, bummer. Try that. Sometimes you can actually take the what and turn them into what? With just a little bit of work. And we're going to have fun with both the bummers and the woohoos today. I plan on doing whatever I can to make sure this is your best event ever. I have been coming to these for a number of years. I mean, this is a 2017. It seemed just like last year. It was 2016. Pause for laughter. I was just looking at my notes here. But I want to thank our sponsors, the Colorado Convention Center. Just give them a hand. Let's just do each one. Our sponsors make this work. Image Audio Visuals, Vail Valley Partnership. Give them a hand. Keep going. Sonoma County, California. Keep going. Centerplate. Keep going. Visit Denver. Vail Resorts Meeting and Events. Great. Breedy Exposition Services. Noble Productions. Don't slow down now. Make sure that you see all the sponsors on the app and remember to buy MIC. I was sponsored last night by Hyatt, but there was another person that sponsored me, Debbie Taylor, TaylorMade Advance. Where is Debbie? Right there. When Debbie asked me to come, I was extremely honored, and I wanted to do something special for her. So part of what I do, I have this policy manual. I tell people that when people tell you they can't do something because it's policy, often it's not in writing. So I came up with my own policy manual where you can write your own policies in it. On the front of it, it says, I grant you the power to serve. This is the special edition for MIC for Debbie. If you look on the back of it where my picture is there's the logo, but you can put your picture over my picture so that it becomes your policy manual. When I travel, I actually like to use his picture when I travel. But the very first time I used it, I checked in a hotel and they told me all they had left were smoking rooms. And I told them I don't have any cigarettes. I mean, there's nothing I can do. And she said, well, we have to be in a smoking room. We'll guarantee your room, but not whether it's smoking or not. And I told her, I said, it doesn't work for me. Do you have a suite? So she, yeah, we do, but they're $150 more per night. Now, I know I can't pass that cost on to my customer, right, Debbie? So I said, can you upgrade me to a suite at no cost since you gave away my non-smoking room? And they said, no. Our what? Our policy is we don't upgrade based on smoking preference. So I opened up my policy manual to page 17 and I read, if I request and reserve a non-smoking room at any hotel and that property then gives my non-smoking room away to another guest prior to my arrival, then said hotel is required by law to upgrade me to a non-smoking suite at no additional cost to me. No exceptions. And I handed it to her. And she looked at it and she showed the other clerk and she goes, it's right there. He's not kidding. She said, I don't know what to do. And I said, my hands are tied. I mean, I would like to help you, but once policy has been evoked, it is a runaway train. And she said, you need to talk to the manager. So I opened up my policy manual to page 22, and I read, once I verbalize my policy to any employee at any level, I'm then forbidden in writing to repeat said policy verbally in writing to anyone else, no exceptions. And she photocopied that and had me initial it and put me in the presidential suite. Woohoo! And you can customize your policies. I had a waitress tell me one time she refused to seat me until the entire dining party had arrived. So I hand wrote in here, if I'm the first of several friends to arrive at a restaurant and the greeter refuses to seat me until the entire dining party has arrived, I'll be provided free of charge any substance I eat or drink during the time the table is withheld, no exceptions. And she said, I just saw you write that in that book. So I turn to the section that authorizes me to write new and updated policies, and this book is needed. She said, you win. I said, I don't want to win, I just want to have fun. So there's a special page in here on page 40 for you that you can write your own policies in, or I hope last night that you'll write in who you'll be kind to and how you'll be kind. There's also, if people tell you no, you can go to page 29, just says yes. Or page 33, which just says because I say so. And if you want to win an argument today, all you really need are right up there are charts and graphs. If you have charts and graphs, you can literally win any argument whatsoever. I tell people, do you want me to be satisfied? Yes, I do. Well, if I don't get my way, I may be only 20% satisfied. If I get my way, I could be up to 100% satisfied, which in the quarterly chart on the left is clearly best for me. And I've had people say to me, that makes sense, Mr. Gar. Now, here's what I'd like to do. I had 200 of these made up. I'm going to give these to Debbie Taylor and to Freddie. Come on up here. These are for you. The first 200 people that come up and all they have to do is say thanks for MIC, they can have one. That's my gift to you, and thank you for sponsoring me. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We've got, I'd like to introduce, I'm sorry, I got to give a shout out. Tina Schwab, is Tina here? Where's Tina Schwab? 2017 Colorado Meetings and Event Magazine up-and-coming supplier. Stand up wherever you are. Please give her a hand. That is just a great accomplishment. So I'd like to introduce quickly the Vail Meetings video. They're a platinum sponsor of our event. And when you get a chance, go back. They've got these little fur chairs, ball chairs back there. You have to try to sit on. They're right back over here. But if we could we run that video? Can we run the video? We can. Oh, that's incredible. Well done. That's Vail Meetings Video. Make sure you go back. They're a platinum sponsor. They're also the sponsor of our next speaker, Michael Dominguez. A lot of you know Michael. One of the things that I do with every time I introduce somebody, I read their accomplishments, but I also want them to tell me something about them that they probably have never told the group before. And he was back as we were going through his accomplishments, and he used to be an altar boy. And as it started coming out, as we're going through, I think it's really pretty cool. He's an altar boy. But he just also came back recently from Rome, where he got to meet Monsignor Lawrence, who is the Pope's attorney. Now, normally you only meet Monsignor Lawrence, I think, when you're in Pope trouble. And so, but they took him on a tour of the Sistine Chapel, the Vatican, and it's as those of you that plan amazing events, I don't think he's going to be able to top exactly what happened to him. And now, whenever the Pope speaks on something, it's translated and sent to him. And I imagine it goes right to the top of your reading queue. But I just thought that was so cool that in our industry, sometimes we have the opportunity to do things like that. And I think that it is part of what we need to do to be able to refresh and renew ourselves. Don't you agree? There are really a lot of business and a lot of things that we have to do and work hard, but there also are perks to this. So I want to introduce Michael Dominguez. He's the Senior Vice President, Global Hotel Sales, MGM Resorts International. And that is not just the MGM. That is like they need their whole zip code. That is almost, it's incredible, the number of hotels. He's the immediate past chairman, International Board of Directors of MPI, Executive Committee, U.S. Travel Association co-chair, Meetings Mean Business Coalition co-chair, and the Apex Task Force on Piracy, which he assures me they are, in fact, against it. The bottom line is he is a really good guy. He's got a lot of really valuable information to pass on to you. Please join me in welcoming Michael Dominguez. Michael, where are you, buddy? There you go.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So I'm glad he actually said if you have a lot of graphs and charts, you can win any argument. So I'm going to win the argument today because there's a lot of graphs and charts we're going to go through. This is always a lot of fun for me. This piece of state of the industry and what's happening, I try to keep it as updated as possible, as relevant as possible, and it's usually why I frustrate all the tech teams because there's not a presentation until a day or two before because the news is changing that quickly. So I'm going to try to bring that to bear and try to explain what's going on, what we see, but more importantly, what does it mean? I'm a big believer in context. It's not about the data, it's not about the numbers, it's about what does it mean to you personally or professionally, how is it going to make you better? To start that, I have a lot of visuals, and one of the things we see is speed of change, and it's speed of change in the industry. It's not just the hotel industry, it's in all industry. And again, I like visuals to kind of hold the marker and to try to make this point. And this is very appropriate because I didn't set this up, but he was talking about my Catholic roots. And I have a picture here because we had an opportunity in 10 years to do something that rarely happens. And we elected 2 popes within a 10-year window. And when you look at this visual, this is St. Peter's Square in 2005 at the inauguration of Pope Benedict. And for those of us that can recall, that's called a flip phone. And it's the only piece of machinery that is in this picture. 10 short years later, we're electing another pope in Pope Francis, and this is the same square. And I said I like visuals because it really puts into perspective what's happening. And I look in our industry, how many times have you been reading today that people are trying to tell you what the future is going to look like? They're going to try to tell you what the meetings industry is going to look like in the year 2020, 2025. I can't tell you what it's going to look like in 2018. So take it with a grain of salt. And the reason I point this out, anybody in 2005 who would have been telling you what our world looks like, the iPad wasn't released until 2009. They would have never seen it coming. They would have never known the impact it would have had to our lives, to our business lives, to our personal entertainment life. So I take it with a grain of salt. It's one of the shifts we look at. If you are one of those that is doing a 5-year plan, years 4 and 5 is called a wish. It is not a plan. Years 1, 2, and 3, you can probably plan to. But everything is moving so quickly, you have to understand what you know today is going to change tomorrow. And that's the mindset I need everyone to get into as we go through this. And it's all industries. This is one of my favorite charts because if you look at this chart, it's looking at the S&P 500, the largest companies in the world. And you can see if you were in the S&P 500, back in 1920, you would have been on the S&P 500 for 67 years. But in 2010, it's now 15 years. And what I have circled is 75%. 2/3 of the largest companies in the world that are on the S&P 500 will not be there in the next 10. You've got to get your head around that. 2/3 of the largest, most successful companies on the S&P 500 will no longer be on the S&P 500. Why? They can't see the trend coming fast enough. They literally cannot see the competition coming fast enough. And that's all of us kind of living in that world. And there's major industries that are in for a shakeup. I'm a big fan of Mary Barra. She is the CEO of General Motors, but she's the one who says there's going to be more change in the automotive industry in the next 10 years than they've had over the last 50. When you think about autonomous cars, when you think about electric cars, think about what that industry has to go through and how they have to change if they're going to survive. And there are a lot of companies that are on the death list. And my apologies to Sears and Radio Shack because you're dead if you don't know it. But I'm putting you on the list. I know you're not completely out of business yet, but you're going to be very shortly. And I look at these companies. These are all companies we lived with, grew up with. They were anchors in our lives, and they are gone. Somebody said, well, BlackBerry's still around. I go, yeah, not really. So that's why they're on the list as well. Think about somebody like BlackBerry. They own the market. There is no reason they should be on this list. Sears own the market. Sears has enough strength that they're going to split the company into Kenmore and Craftsman, because Craftsman Tools has such a brand upon itself. Kenmore Appliances has such a brand upon itself. So think about that. The company has two of the strongest brands in the world that can stand up on its own, and they're going out of business. They just never saw the changes and the trends coming. And I try to show this to everybody because it will happen to everybody. Every vertical, every business is vulnerable. I'm a big fan of John Chambers. I quote John Chambers often. He is the chairman of Cisco. John has some real simple quotes that are easy to grasp. One of them that he says often: disrupt or be disrupted, make your choice, because disruption's coming. But you do not have the choice not to be disrupted. Disrupt or be disrupted. And John also points out research, and I've seen him actually share this research with his largest audience, which is 1,000 of his biggest customers. And the research applies to any room, so I share it often. 40% of you in this room will not be relevant in any significant way in the next 5 years because you can't change fast enough. 40% of you. Doesn't mean you won't be around. It doesn't mean you won't be in business. It just means you're not going to be relevant to the conversation. You're not going to be relevant to innovation. You're not going to be relevant to change. That's the mindset we have to get into in our industry, and it's a setup for what we're going to talk about today. If you haven't noticed, there's been a little change in Washington, just a little bit. And this has been fun for me because talking about the state of the industry, there is no way to talk about the state of the industry and not talk about a very emotional election and what it means to us moving forward. So let me preface this. First, I am not endorsing or saying that President Trump will be a good president, bad president, whether he should or shouldn't be president. What I am saying is I'm going to walk through what his attempted policies will mean to us from a business perspective and what it will mean from a travel industry. As I've shared with many groups, we were pregnant, we had the baby, we need to raise the child, and we still want to debate whether we should have gotten pregnant or not. We need to move on because this is an important part of the conversation. So that's my setup. So let's talk about President Trump. Every media outlet told you when he was elected that the markets were going to crash, we were going to go into a recession, and it was going to be Armageddon. The opposite has happened. They also told you he wasn't going to win, by the way. So they were wrong and dead wrong because the market has actually crossed 3 thresholds faster than we've seen any time over the last 100 years. To go from 18 to 19 to 20, which is it's a psychological threshold on the Dow to cross 20,000, and then go from 20 to 21,000 within a couple of weeks, it's telling you that the investment community is really excited about this administration. The investment community is forward-looking. They don't look in the rearview mirror. So why are they excited? Well, first, they never thought he was going to win. And now that they actually started to look at it, they're sitting there going, wow, this may actually be good for business. And that's where the enthusiasm is coming from the market. And it's the hat trick. It's every index in the market. It's the Dow, it's the NASDAQ, it's the S&P. It's not just one indicator that is telling us there's enthusiasm in the investment world. People are putting their money where they believe it's going to grow. And that has a lot to do with this administration. And you'll see this was him being elected on November 8th. This is the rise in the stock market since then. And there's the hat trick. Every single index has been growing. So no industry is being left behind, and you'll see that with this chart. Every industry is growing. Consumer staples are down, but consumers kind of move back and forth. Utilities are down just a bit. That has a lot to do with electricity, oil, and gas, but we'll talk about that. Everything else is growing, and the financials are leading the charge. So why are the financials leading the charge? We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but that has a lot to do with his belief of rolling back some regulation. Mainly Dodd-Frank that was put into place in 2009. It doesn't mean it's going away, but our government, as they typically do, they overreacted. So we put so much regulation, some regulation was needed. We put so much regulation that it strangled growth. Growth in the financial markets, growth in construction, and that's been a big overhang of this recession and this recovery so far. But we'll talk about that even a little bit further. So, show of hands and be honest. How many of you know what the repatriation tax is? Yeah. No, it's pretty normal. The repatriation tax, by the way, when I ask a room, there's usually not more than a couple of hands that go up. So if we talk about repatriation and what the repatriation tax is, this is probably one of the biggest reasons Wall Street is reacting the way they are. So the United States has had a policy, and they have a tax in place that's called repatriation. It's patriot, being a patriot. If we have a global company and we make money overseas, and I've made profit, let's say in France, I've paid a French tax on all that money. To bring that cash back to the United States, it would cost me 35% of the money. A check to the government to bring the cash back. We wonder why factories are being built overseas. We're wondering why jobs continue to be brought overseas. It's because companies build where the cash is, and the cash is overseas. Right now, there is $2.5 trillion in profit in U.S. companies that is sitting overseas. For them to bring that money back, they would be writing a check to the U.S. government for $800 billion. It doesn't happen. It's not moving. These are the biggest companies. You look at Microsoft, GE, Apple, Pfizer, IBM. So Apple has $108 billion sitting overseas. For them to bring that money back and use it in the United States, they'd have to write a check for $37 billion. Why would they do it? They won't. And that's why the money consistently is overseas. President Trump is going to reduce this tax from 35% to 10%. It's only been done one time in the last 40 years. It was during President George W. Bush's term. In 2005, they lowered, Bush with Congress, they lowered the tax to 10% for 1 year. $780 billion came back to the United States. So that 10% push is going to be big. And I go back to the stimulus bill we passed in 2009 that was all taxpayer money, was $1 trillion. If half of this comes back, we'll have $1 trillion coming into our economy without a single dime being paid by the taxpayer. That's some of the enthusiasm that Wall Street is seeing. And it's a tax that he's willing to attack because he's a businessman and he understands this doesn't make a lot of sense. You know who used to fight this for the longest time? The unions. The unions wanted this tax because they believed it would keep companies from actually doing business overseas. What they're learning now is it's costing them jobs because the money is sitting overseas. So the unions are now in favor of this, and you're going to see this start to come back. This is a big piece, and it's way under the radar that most people aren't talking about. The other thing we know about his policies, financial and insurance markets are going to do real well. I kind of showed you the financial markets. There is a bipartisan support when it comes to infrastructure, and he wants to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure development. By the way, we have not had an infrastructure plan in the United States since Dwight D. Eisenhower created the interstate highways over 50 years ago. It's highly needed. We all agree on it, and the money needs to be spent. It's going to be great for construction. So anybody involved in construction and commercial development, you're going to see this start to take off, and there is a push to rebuild our Defense Department. The Defense Department has been decimated over the last 6 years because of sequestering. If you remember Congress, they all negotiated this bill and they cut 10% of everything. We've been cutting 10% from the military for the last 6 years. There's going to be a buildup in the military, and that's a real positive to certain companies. These are the largest defense contractors out there. You're looking at Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics. These are the same companies by area of the military. So you're looking at, there is a common, Lockheed Martin is #1 across the board. Boeing's going to be in there. They just kind of switch places as far as where their interest is for different parts of the military. These companies are going to do well. They're going to be planning a lot of meetings, and they're going to be making a lot of money over a short period of time. So that is what we know so far as those parts of policy. We're going to come back to Trump and travel, but I'm going to take a little bit of break, and let's get back into the hotel business and tell you what's going on here. So if we look at the global hotel industry, everybody is growing in the global world except for the Middle East and Africa. In the Middle East and Africa, it's common. It's terrorism. It is the reason they are not growing. There is so much terrorism. There are so many governments that are failing in these areas. There's a major challenge. Most of us don't pay attention to what happens in Africa, but Africa has a booming hospitality market. And in those luxury hotels, they've had literally ISIS terrorists coming in, taking people hostages, and even worse, killing them. So that has been an ongoing problem. This chart will actually show you the number of deaths related to terrorism around the world. And what you will see, and it's quite disturbing when you look at it, right at 2011, the Syrian civil war begins. And this is the birth of ISIS. And the birth of ISIS, right on that line in 2011, it's where you see the hockey stick as far as the number of deaths related to terrorism around the world. And you can see it, Iraq and Afghanistan, probably not a surprise. Nigeria, probably a surprise to most people. But right under the peach color, that green is the rest of the world. That is Europe, it's the United States, it's the danger that is continuing to pick up steam until we resolve ISIS, until we take care of that situation. That is going to be a continued problem. And this tells us that it's going to lag on the hospitality industry from a global perspective. So, globally, from an economic view, we're taking a look at it. Global GDP is going to grow at 3.5%. That's what we're expecting around the world. So it's pretty healthy growth. You can see we've been growing from 2015, 2016, 2017. You look at the United States, we're forecasting to grow at 2.5%, so we're lagging the world numbers. Canada's looking at only growing at 1.9%. You look at the projected GDP when we look at what's happening in Asia, and you can see the growth is literally with China, Vietnam, and India is leading the charge. India is leading the charge at 7.2% projected GDP for the year. There's going to be really a lot of strength in Asia-Pacific market. That's going to be outstanding. And lagging is Latin America. Latin America is lagging in pockets, but mainly it's Brazil. As you can see, it says 0.0, and that's being optimistic because I think it's going to be backwards and it's going to be a negative when it's all said and done. But that is kind of the world picture when you look at GDP. And then you look at GDP in Europe. It's a little spotty in Europe, depending on what you're looking at. But leading the charge is going to be Spain and Greece. Greece leading the charge is a very interesting statement and quite ironic because they're still bankrupt, but that's a whole other discussion. At least they're growing. But Europe is my biggest concern because when we look at Europe, there's a few things that are going on. Italy's economy is teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, and most people aren't talking about it. They had a referendum in November where the president asked for more authority to be able to control this. The referendum was shot down and the president walked away. He basically said, I'm out because I'm not going to deal with it if you're not going to give me the authority. Because it's not going to be fixed without changing the rules that they currently have in place. Now, why is this important? If Italy goes belly up, it's Greece all over again, but Italy's economy is 4 times the size of Greece. Europe could sustain Greece going bankrupt. Europe cannot sustain Italy going bankrupt. Their debt to GDP ratio right now is 175%. So let me tell you what that means. For every dollar their economy brings in, it's costing them $1.75 to make it. It's unsustainable long term. The other biggest concern, and this is the one that keeps me up at night, France has 2 elections this year. And both leading candidates in these elections are big supporters of this huge populist movement in Europe to leave the EU. And if they leave the Eurozone, the Euro is over. And it's going to be a lot of chaos, literally, in Europe for at least a year. My bet is that the Euro is going to fall apart because there is so much dissatisfaction with it. And we all know about Brexit. Brexit, nothing has happened. The only thing that happened with Brexit is the UK said we're going to leave. They have not actually stated how they're going to leave, what that's going to look like. That's Article 50. Article 50 should be executed sometime in June and July. June and July, they'll finally find out what does it mean that the UK is actually going to leave the Eurozone. Now, why am I worried about it? Because this chart will show you dissatisfaction with the Euro's handling of economic, or the EU's handling of the economic situation in Europe. And I drew the green line there. From the UK on up, you will see it's 55% or more. More than half the country is dissatisfied with the way it's being handled. And you know it's serious when Sweden's on there because they're never mad at anybody. And they're actually upset with things going on. This is a major challenge. There is a huge populist movement in Europe where people are sick of the status quo. They are sick of the current government. And anybody who didn't think Trump could win did not pay attention to Brexit. Brexit was the signal that Trump could win this thing. Because around the world, there is this dissatisfaction to say we're really sick of the current situation. We're really sick of these lifelong politicians that have been there. It doesn't mean it's always moving the right way, but that's what's driving it. And it's around the world. The other thing that people miss with Brexit, Brexit was not an economic vote. It was an immigration vote. And you think about some of the conversation and some of the conversation going on right now, it's the same conversation going on around the world. Brexit was an immigration vote. The UK chose to leave the EU so that they could determine what they were going to do with the refugees coming in from Syria into their country. Because as part of the EU, it was being dictated to them what was going to happen. That was the vote. It had nothing to do with the economy. It had everything to do with the rest of the rules that were being applied. And that's what I'm saying in Europe. This is probably the one thing that keeps me up at night, because this is going to be a little challenge as we move forward through the year. So let's move to better things. Let's talk about the U.S., because things are actually pretty good in the U.S. From a hotel perspective. I like to start in 2015. 2014 was an all-time record. 2015 broke that all-time record. Look at status and remarks. All in green, all a record. Let's move to 2016. Yes, I changed the chart. It doesn't look like I did, but I changed the chart because we set all-time records, again, in every major index. That is the important message here. We are at a place that we've never seen before. If any of you are in this room and you've been doing this a long time, I've been in it for 30 years now. If you've been doing this a long time and you're saying it's cyclical, I've seen this cycle before, I know we're going to go back to it, I'm here to tell you, no, we're not. It's a different cycle. Again, been doing it 30 years. I've never seen the nuance that we see in the industry today, and I'm going to walk you through the nuance. I'm going to tell you why it's a little different and why it's special. Anybody still thinking about 2010 or back in the heyday and what that looked like? This is just to give you some perspective. Since 2010, average rate you will pay at the hotels is up 56%. Occupancy is up almost 30. Total RevPAR of the hotels is up almost 100. Anybody talking about the heyday, it's not relevant. It has no meaning in today's world. So you got to get past it. Just move on. Because and a lot of this that I'm sharing is for your stakeholders. I know it's not for you in the room. You know, you have bosses, you have finance people, procurement people. You have somebody setting a budget that sometimes I think is unrealistic. And they're not understanding what the world looks like. This information is for them and to help you educate them as far as what's happening. Again, I like visuals. This is just a quick visual to show you how big our industry is today. But back in 2007, which was the old record year, we actually sold 350 million rooms in the United States on a 12-month rolling average. Today we're at 423 million. Just look at the breadth of the industry. It's nowhere near what it used to be. So again, 2007 has no relevance. It has no impact on what we look at today. 2016, we had moderate growth, and the message we're reading now is that it was an incredibly average year. I just showed you a chart that it broke the all-time record, and it was the all-time record year, but the messaging is it's incredibly average. I say that because you're going to read that more often. What's average is the growth, but it's still growing off all-time records. The growth is slowing down as you would expect. We can't grow at that pace forever, but we're still growing. And it's important to keep that perspective. It doesn't mean we're necessarily shrinking as an industry. And this chart, just another great visual. It's from Oxford Economics. We are actually occupying 65% of all hotel rooms in the United States. We've never done that in history. You can go back to the 1980s. We've never occupied 65% of all hotel rooms in the U.S. Now, we're going to be at record occupancies. We're going to stay at record occupancies. But this is the conundrum for the meeting professional. Your top 25 markets, the New Yorks, the Chicagos, the San Franciscos, the DCs, the Denvers of the world, running 73% occupancy, well north of the averages. Your second-tier cities running 61%. So in your big cities, you can't find the space. But in your small cities, we have the space, but airlines cut 15% of all flights to those cities. So you have the space, but you can't get them there. Your larger cities, you can't find the space, but you can fly them there. It's a conundrum for the meeting professional today. And this isn't going to go away in the near future, but what I'm trying to point out, it doesn't mean there's not availability in the U.S. It's just not availability most of the time where you want it. That's the challenge today. And it's going to continue to be the challenge. So let's talk about one of those shifts. I said things are dynamically different than any other cycle we've seen. This chart has a lot of information, but I'm going to point to what you need to be looking at. There's two lines on here. You see there's a green line and a blue line. The blue line represents group rooms in the United States. The green line represents transient rooms. So the way we define it for everybody in the room, by the way, we have group, and all non-group is called transient. Doesn't matter what comes through. We have a whole bunch of channels, but it's transient or group. So when you look at this chart, we know we fell apart in 2009 as a group industry. We recovered all of the group rooms back to 2007 levels in November of 2014, and today we are sitting at about 2.2 million more group rooms in the United States today than we had in 2007. Hold on to that number because it's important. 2.2 million more group rooms in the U.S. on an average basis annually than we did in 2007. Now here's the interesting part on transient. Transient recovered in October of 2009. And you look at where transient is today, There's 40 million more transient rooms in the United States on an average basis than we had on an annual basis than we had in 2007. 40 million more transient. And the reason this is important, this is now competition for the same guest room you're trying to get for your meeting. That's what's shifted. We've never seen this type of transient demand in our lifetime. And here's the challenge for the meeting professional. The transient pays so much more in rate. And in the hotel business, we don't say this often enough, not every dollar is equal. Every dollar we lose or gain in average rate is 98 cents in profit. Every dollar we get in food and beverage is 40 cents in profit. And at the end of the day, we're a profit company. That's what we're in the business for. So that's the challenge. And what we're finding and why this is important, we're finding a lot of planners are blowing through their blocks. Contracts were conservative as everybody was protecting for attrition, as you should have been in a down period. Everybody's blowing through their blocks. They're calling the hotels. They're asking for more rooms. And they're being told you're going to get them, but they're at a higher rate. And there's this freak out moment. And we don't understand why. This is what's driving it. And there's some nuance in this. Why is transient through the roof? 3 things that are driving it. First, we have 35 million older millennials. And we're going to talk about the millennials a little bit more, but you're making a mistake if you don't separate the older from the youngers. The older millennials, 28 to 35, are now in their careers, now have money, now have disposable income, and they believe travel is their right. And they travel in packs, if you haven't noticed. They come in groups. So this is 35 million new travelers introduced into the market. Now what's complicating it, and you see this kind of demand, is you have a boomer audience that just won't go away. So you've got a boomer population. Traditionally, a generation moves out as a generation moves in, and that is not a criticism of boomers. Boomers have redefined what retirement looks like, what work after retirement looks like, and what travel looks like. And what we forget is the boomers were the birth of the 401k plan. And the first boomer this year is turning 70, which means they have to automatically start withdrawing those plans even if they didn't want to. They have no choice but to start taking the money out. And it's a generation that also believes travel is their right. So they're going to continue to travel and continue to move on. And then the third piece to this that's driving it is international traffic to the United States is up almost 35% over the last 3 years. That's the driver. And that is what is driving this kind of transient demand. It's not going away, because even though we may see some softness in certain areas, and we'll talk about some of the travel bans and those type of things, even though we may feel some softness, China will more than compensate for anything we're going to lose, because China is going to grow by 30% to the United States in the next 2 years. We can lose 10% somewhere else. We're going to gain it from Chinese travelers as they start to come to the U.S. So the question I get is, how long can this last? And if you look at this chart, these are the last 3 recovery cycles as far as RevPAR in the U.S. And you'll see in that first cycle from 1990 to 2000, we basically grew positively in RevPAR for 113 consecutive months. You look at the second window between 2001 and 2009, it was 56 months, and we're now 82 months into this cycle. So that tells us we could grow for another 2 years and we still won't be at the record. We have some room, we have some runway. This hasn't slowed down, and we don't see it slowing down in the near future. Let me rephrase that. We will slow down, but we don't see us going negative in the near future. That is going to continue to be a positive indicator. And why do we believe that? Another chart from Oxford Economics. The bottom line tells you this is the growth of GDP in the United States, dating back to 1980, and 78%, by the way, is pathetic, but that is our growth in GDP as a country. But the important line is right above it. The amount of spend on travel by the consumer is up 245% during the same time frame. We are spending more of our income on travel than we have at any other time in history as a society. That's why we don't see it slowing down. And I do look at it. The boomers traveled, which means the Xers learned to travel, and now the millennials believe it's their right to travel because it's how they grew up. It's just how we looked at the world. I grew up in San Antonio. I never knew the world existed past Corpus Christi, Texas, because we never went further than that on our vacations. That was it. I never left the state until I was 18. And I mean that sincerely. We didn't travel that way growing up. But the world's different today. And my kids grew up different because we traveled the world, and they expect to travel the world. They expect that it's their right. So what does all this mean? Flexibility. We always talk about flexibility. When you're talking to your stakeholders, days of the week matter, patterns matter, moving your load in, load out. All the flexibility that you can give will actually make it easier for you to be somewhere. And here's an important piece to look at. If you look at occupancy in the United States by day of the week, Tuesday through Saturday, we are sold out. So if you were a group and you're a corporate group and you're saying, well, my people don't want to travel on Monday, we get that. But guess what? You're going to pay for it. Because we're sold out Tuesday through Saturday. There is nothing incremental you're bringing to the negotiation at that point. Because if you're not willing to pay the rate, there's somebody behind you that will when you have that kind of demand. You throw in a Sunday or a Monday, it's incremental. You now have leverage and you can bargain a little more with the hotel. I promise you there's not a resort destination salesperson in here that wouldn't give you a good deal for a Sunday, Wednesday pattern. We'll be a little more flexible on Sunday through Wednesday because it is a better pattern and it's incremental. So here's a great data point. I'm a data nerd if you haven't figured this out yet. I really love data because it helps me figure out what's really going on. But here's a little piece of information that I know I geeked out about and you probably won't, but I have to share with you. It's something that if you go share with people, they're going to say, okay, this is a really cool stat. In 2016, we had a unique situation. The hotel industry had 53 weekends to sell. That can only happen in a leap year where Friday is January 1st. It will not happen again to the year 2044. Now, why does that matter? We gain an extra Sunday, Monday this year. So we gain a 57% occupancy day and a 70% occupancy day versus gaining an 80% and 76%. It's 1.5% in RevPAR to the United States in decrease just because of the calendar, because we lost the weekend. Like I said, I know I'm more impressed with that than you are, but it's really a cool stat. So I had to share it with you. So demand and supply, let's look at this. I think I've beat to death that demand's at an all-time record, and we have some unique nuances. Here's the challenge. We're not building ballrooms in the United States. We're not building any meeting space. So this chart will tell you, we measure in the US the amount of square feet per guest room in the United States. So when you look at 2000 to 2009, that number sat at 23.4. 23.4 square feet of meeting space for every guest room that existed in the US. Today, that number's 17.8. We're going backwards. So yes, we're opening up supply, but we're not building ballrooms. 75% of everything that's opened in the last 4 years is limited service. Hampton Inn, Hilton Gardens, Courtyard by Marriott's. They're popping up left and right. You see them in every city. You know why? They make money. They actually make 55% GOP before they ever pay debt service. So they're a really good business model. But this was a regulation, this was a financial crisis, and the regulation piece I talked about earlier is what strangled growth in our markets. It's the reason you don't have hotels being built, because banks cannot, even if they wanted to, cannot loan on those type of projects because they're too high risk the way the regulations are currently written. So what are they loaning on? Hampton Inn, the Courtyard by Marriott, a Hilton Garden, because they make money. And it's an easy proposition because it'll pay back the loan in 7 years. It's not the same when you're building a big box because the big box is a real estate play, it's not a hotel play. That's a challenge for us. No new meeting space. Remember the number I told you to hold on to? 2.2 million more group rooms in the US, and we don't have any more ballrooms. That's why you're feeling the compression. So when you're reading that supply is starting to pick up, keep in mind, that means there's a lot of hotel rooms getting onto the market that's not helping you with meeting space. Unless you're a citywide, it will help you on a major citywide in a major city, i.e. New York, because it's bringing the price down just a little bit. It's not going to help you otherwise because there's no new meeting space. The positive is you can see the blue lines and the red line, they're finally kissing. And that's a good thing, which means we're finally going to be opening up hotels at the same pace of new demand in the United States. But the problem is you see that white between the blue and the red? When you look at going back to 2010, you have to make all that up. We have all this area we have to make up, and this is a better visual of it. Green shows you demand and blue shows you supply. We have to go back and make up all that lack of supply over those last 5 years, and we just didn't have it. So even though supply is starting to pick up, we have a lot of pent-up demand that it needs to recover from, and it's going to take a little bit of time. So here's adding salt to the wound. Smith Travel actually does, they actually do this research project every couple of years, and they take 2013 and 2015, and they measure what's happening in meetings. Well, here's an interesting stat. Between 2013 and 2015, the only growth in meetings are in meetings 1,000 people plus. So your largest meetings are the only meetings growing at the same time where we're not building any new ballrooms. That's a challenge. And that is why we're feeling this compression when you're looking for space and you can't find it. It's going to continue to be a challenge. So let's move on to the economics of the United States. What's going on here and what does it all mean? Well, the strong dollar is killing us, and the strong dollar is still going to create friction in the U.S. And I know this sounds backwards, but the U.S. dollar is really strong. So what does that mean? The rest of the world, we may be a little chaotic here, but investment from the rest of the world is investing in the U.S. dollar because we're the safest bet. So we may be a little messed up, but we're less messed up than the rest of the world. So that's what that means by having a strong dollar. But the way the dollar works, this is starting to hurt corporate profits for these global companies because the currency exchange rate is so dramatic right now. One of the positives we've heard out of the Trump administration is they want to weaken the dollar. Now, I know that sounds backwards, but it's actually really good for long-term stability in the economy. So we hope the Treasury Department actually does that. The other thing we know is coming, and look, if you don't know Janet Yellen, you need to know Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen is one of the most powerful people on this planet, and she is definitely the smartest woman in the U.S. when she talks to the Senate. She has to talk to the Senate once a quarter, and she kind of tells everybody what's going on. And literally, I look at the senators, and we're like, yo, you poor thing, because they have no idea what they're talking about, and she's running circles around them. But what she does is when she speaks, the world markets will react. What she has been prepping everybody for later this month, she is going to start moving interest rates up. And interest rates are going to matter, and that's going to shock the markets just a little bit. She's lessening the shock because she's been warning them. It's coming. She's also going to raise it 3 times before the end of the year. Now, why would we be raising interest rates? Because it's saying there's a lot of strength in the economy, and it's starting to see stability. Their job at the Fed is to make sure we don't go too fast and we don't go too slow. We need to make sure we squash growth, that it's not going too rapidly, because then you get massive inflation if you don't. That's her job. So by raising interest rates, it means it's going to cost us a little more to borrow. That means it slows down some of the borrowing. That is her job and her tool. Now, it's going up a 1/4 of a point or a 1/2 a point. You're not going to see anything dramatic until you get to the end of the year. But companies are noticing, because if you look at this chart, this is the amount of corporate leverage refinancing, them trying to refinance their debt, and look at the spike at the end of 16 and early 17. Why is it spiking? Because if you have $1 billion loan and you know the interest rate's going to go up 1%, you should probably refinance now before the interest rates go up. That's an important part of it. And it matters to our country as well, because that 1 percentage point in interest rate will represent $4.8 trillion in debt cost for us as a country. The one thing we do not talk about is our national debt is $19 trillion. So for that 1 percentage point increase in interest rates, we are making payments on the money we've already borrowed. It's going to cost us $4.8 trillion over the next 10 years in extra interest. It's not us borrowing more money. It's just paying the interest off of what we've already borrowed. That's why the national debt continues to be talked about, because it's unsustainable. We become Europe if this continues. We become Greece, we become Italy, because right now our debt to GDP ratio in the US is at 80%. We're almost at 100% debt to GDP ratio. So what does it mean when we get to 100%? For every dollar we're bringing in, we're spending $1 to get it. That is unsustainable long term. It's why the national debt has to be addressed. So we also look at the oil industry. Oil and the dollar, they're really funny. I always say they're like Goldilocks and the 3 bears. They can't be too high, can't be too low, need to be just right. And the dollar right now is too high. Oil has been too low for a long period of time. The price of oil matters to the U.S. because most of us don't realize, when you look at this chart, that first bar is gray. The United States is the 2nd largest contributor of oil to the world market behind OPEC. And most of us don't realize that. We are the 2nd largest contributor of oil to the world market. So the price of oil matters. That is huge for our economy. It's huge for jobs. And the reason it matters significantly, the price of oil sat at $25 for 18 months. You'll see U.S. shale, because a lot of the oil we're pulling out of the country is coming through fracking, coming through the middle of the country. We actually need the cost of the barrel of oil to be between $40 or $60 to be profitable, while OPEC only needed it to be at 20. So OPEC could sustain for 18 months at $25 a barrel. The U.S. could not. So this is the amount of bankruptcies that are related to oil and energy during that time frame. We lost 500,000 jobs in the United States because of the price of oil during that time frame. And if you look at what happened to our industry, the only negatives in RevPAR across the U.S. have one thing in common. Everywhere that oil and energy is the dependency of that state is where we started to decline. We all know Texas and Louisiana depends on oil. Middle of the country is where all the fracking came from. And you go to the Northeast, and that is energy country. That is where we were starting to falter as an economy. And this has been under the radar because it's been underreported. We have not been talking enough about why this is so important and what that policy looks like. But the important part is it looks like oil is going to rebound. We've been sitting at about $50. We think it's going to stay at $50. OPEC agreed to limit production. That's going to help us long term. So those are kind of the issues, and these are the biggest drivers of our economy, and it's why I take the time to talk about it. It's oil, and it's the dollar and the strength of the dollar. So let's go back to the travel ban. We've talked about what's going on with the travel ban. What does it mean? What does it look like? Look, the very first travel ban that was released couldn't have been released in a worse way. It was a cluster. It was chaotic. It wasn't communicated very effectively. We know that was squashed. There is a second executive order that was just released. Actually, last week they announced it. It takes place in 4 more days, and it goes into effect. It is written so much clearer that it avoided a lot of the chaos. So what does it mean? It means a couple of things when you're looking at it. There is a 120-day suspension of refugees from these 6 countries. Iraq has been removed from the list because there were originally 7. Here's the thing. It's a 90-day ban on visa applications from these 6 countries only. That's all it is. It is a literal pause on new visas that are being requested from these 6 countries. If you currently have a visa, if you currently have citizenship, you can travel freely. There is no issue. And that was not addressed in the original executive order. The original executive order never said, what do we do with the 60,000 visas that are already pre-approved? That's what created the chaos. That's what created people getting held up that shouldn't have been held up because they already had a pre-approved visa. But let's go through the story. If you want to know about the 6 countries, they didn't come out of the air. We passed a travel terrorism act in 2015, was passed by Congress, that identified these 7 countries as the greatest risk to the United States. Visa waiver was pulled from these countries back in 2015. But of course, nobody talked about it, nobody screamed about it, but the visa waiver system was pulled back in 2015. So this isn't made up, this is not new. These 6 countries have been identified. Why have they been identified? 3 out of the 6 have no government. They have a failed state, which means there is no government, there is no process. When you travel on a visa, if you ever have, you have to have paperwork. There has to be a passport with a visa in it and an exchange of information. Who are you exchanging information with in Syria right now? That's the issue. And that is the biggest reason that the government is saying pause, time out. We just need to figure out how we can vet these people because we don't exactly know who's coming in because they have no paperwork. They don't have birth certificates, they don't have passports, and they have no government. That's why these 7 countries or these 6 countries were identified. I get really irritated today that I don't think we have journalists in the world. We have too much media. We have a few journalists, but they're very far and few between, and they don't tell you what it is and what it isn't. And the first time I presented, even on the first executive order, people were losing their minds. And I asked them, how many of you have even read the executive order? I think 2 hands went up. I go, but tell me everything it is. Now, I get a lot of this because I'm on the executive committee for the U.S. Travel Association. It matters to us. We care about it. And we always say there has to be a balance between free travel and safety. And how do we strike that balance? And it's not an easy answer. But visas are not a right. I just went to China. I have to get approved to go to China. I have to get a visa. China has to allow me to come into the country. But for some reason, we think it's different. And that's not the way the visa process works. You have to be accepted. And that is what this pause is going to be. I will tell everybody it's incumbent upon us to tell the right messages. Because I've had people from the UK call me saying, I'm not coming because I'm worried about travel. I said, well, unless you took your vacation to Syria, you're okay. You're not going to be held up. And you know what the requirement is? If you have visited any of these 6 countries in the last 18 months and it wasn't because you had family there or it wasn't because you're on business, you're going to be held up. Because the question is, why would you go? Why would you go to Yemen? Why would you go to Syria unless you had business or family there? That is the question that is being answered by the ban. I will just say, as I started this earlier, take a deep breath. The first one was chaotic and a cluster, and it was a mess. Hands down. This executive order is actually thoughtful. They'd spent 3.5 weeks writing it out, and they've taken a lot of time to make sure it's clear as far as what they're trying to do with it. It's an important message, and we have to make sure we all understand it. There's another little thing going on with visas that nobody's talking about. The EU has drawn a line in the sand with the United States, and this could impact everybody in this room. But we literally have about 60 days to respond because our 2-year clock expired. But the EU literally is going to or wants to kick out visa waiver, which means anytime you go to Europe, you're going to have to start applying for a visa. There's a reason for it. You know why? The EU is a collection of European nations, and we have visa waiver with all but 6. Romania and Croatia being the top 2. Those 6 that we don't have, there's always a 6 number, isn't there? There's these 6 countries in Europe. Those 6 countries do not have the electronic support that we need for visa waiver. Visa waiver doesn't mean just come in. Visa waiver means we're trading information electronically about you. And the problem is those 6 countries don't have the equipment or the technology in place to make that happen. So what the Eurozone is saying, you're either going to accept us all because we're the Eurozone or the European Union, or you're going to accept nobody. And if that happens, that means everybody's going visas now. If we go to London, you would be applying for a visa. If you went to France, you would be applying for a visa versus just using your passport. This one's a serious situation. I really think it's a ploy. They're really playing poker right now, and I don't think they'd go through with it. Because I showed you what their economies are doing. Their economies depend on us traveling there. So I don't think they want to go through with it. I think they're trying to make a point, and they're trying to get us to resolve it because the 2-year clock ended. The previous administration didn't want to touch it, nor would any administration. He just kind of stiff-armed it, or the administration did, because they're like, okay, I'm gone, let someone else deal with this. Because the clock was going to expire afterwards. And again, that's not a criticism. I get it. It's just a headache to deal with the EU and trying to figure out what this looks like. But the clock has now expired as of March of this year. So now we have 60 days to actually respond and figure out what are we going to do with it. So keep this on the radar. It's important, especially if you have international audiences, because it's going to be important to travel and what that looks like.
Sometimes you know your phone.
Sorry, I pushed the button too quickly. That is all the physical aspects of security. I want to talk about cybersecurity, because cybersecurity we don't talk enough about, but I want to show you a quick video that really starts to emphasize a point.
Sometimes you know your phone has been hacked, but often you don't. We sat down with some of the world's best hackers who showed us just how easy it is for them to get access to everything on your phone. Is everything hackable?
Yes.
Everything?
Yes.
If somebody tells you you can't do it.
I don't believe it.
John Herring offered to prove it. So he gathered a group of ace hackers at our Las Vegas hotel. Each of them a specialist in cracking mobile devices and figuring out how to protect them.
Would you put your money in a bank that didn't test the locks on their safes? You know, we need to try and break it to make sure that the bad guys can't.
How easy is it to break the phone right now?
Very easy.
As you've seen, pretty trivial.
So do I need to connect to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It started when we logged on to the hotel Wi-Fi. At least it looked like the hotel Wi-Fi. Herring had created a ghost version. It's called spoofing.
I mean, this looks legitimate.
It looks very legitimate. So you're connected,
I am.
and I have your email.
You have access to my email right now?
Yeah, it's coming through right now. I now have a ride-sharing application up here, all the information that's being transmitted, including your account ID, your mobile phone, which I just got the mobile number, then more importantly, I have all the credit cards associated with that account.
30 seconds. It took 30 seconds for them to hack, and you heard him say everything is hackable. And you've heard me say often we need to elevate the dialogue in our industry, because I always joke, we're still asking if Wi-Fi is free. And this is what we need to be focusing on. And these are the challenges that we have when it comes to bandwidth, Wi-Fi technology, and what that looks like. Scares the heck out of us at hotels as we're getting into keyless entry, and all of a sudden your phone is going to be a key. You heard him say everything is hackable. We have Black Hat every year at Mandalay Bay, and these guys come in, they scare the hell out of us because they really show you how vulnerable everything is. They're the best hackers in the world, and they're not malicious. Black Hat Conference, they're not malicious. They're there to actually show you where the vulnerabilities are. But it'll tell you This is something as an industry we're not spending enough time in, but let's talk about other disruption. When I look at disruption, and you heard me talk about this a little bit last year, esports is exploding. And you have to understand what esports means because it is a growing industry, it is dynamic, and it is going to continue to take the meeting space that there isn't enough of because they spend a lot of money for this meeting space. When you look at the amount of cash and prize money that revolves around esports, it's here and it's here to stay. There's a lot of corporate involvement. There's a lot of corporate sponsorship. The World Championships in London of League of Legends had 100,000 people in person and 35 million people watching worldwide on Twitch. Twitch is the YouTube of e-gaming. Here's the thing, that audience of 35 million was larger than the audience for the NBA Finals. This is a real business and real growth. And let me show you a quick video of what that looks like.
Coming from a small country where, nobody knew me, to be here right now is really amazing.
Com certeza, o dia de hoje eu acho que é um dos dias mais importantes da minha vida. Um dia que a gente pode fazer história representando o Brasil.
Best showing of an international wildcard team ever at the World Championship.
Flash Wolves might just be cool here. Cool Tigers, too far behind, can't do anything. What is up with the upsets?
Cloud9 versus Fnatic is a long-standing rivalry here.
Double kill for Balls, a triple kill for Balls. Holy cow, is he gonna get it? Double kill for Balls.
Week 2, Fnatic came to...
It's crazy, seriously. They are fanatics, they sell shirts, these teams have followers. Now ESPN has a channel dedicated to them. This is real. And if you haven't paid attention to it, you need to get on the bus quickly because this thing is taking off and it's taking off in a major way. I always joke, if you're one of those parents telling your kid to get outside because they're playing video games all day, take them a sandwich and a Coke and shut up and leave them alone because they can make a lot of money when they get through with all of this. It's a good career move. Let them stay with it. The other thing I look at is we're in the fourth industrial revolution, and we don't talk about that often enough, but you can see the difference of stages of the revolutions, and they're getting faster. And that's kind of the important point. But the 4.0, or the fourth industrial revolution, is about, we've talked about AI and IoT, the Internet of Everything. That's what this revolution is about. It's about connecting all devices today. And part of the talk we have is artificial intelligence and what that looks like. And artificial intelligence is growing and growing in a big way. And artificial intelligence means these machines learn. They start to learn your behaviors. They learn what you ask. They learn what your patterns are. They're going to continue to pick up steam. But you are going to be living in a world in the next 10 years or so that everything is voice activated. We're not going to have a lot of buttons to push. It's going to be us speaking as far as how we're going to move things and do things. And it's an important one because the argument today has been augmented and virtual. We have everybody talk about virtual reality, virtual reality. That's not the winning thing. That is great in games, and it's great for specific uses, but augmented reality is where we're at. And augmented reality, it's what's going to move it forward. I'm a big fan of HoloLens, and it's what Microsoft has just released. They're starting to program it. It is augmented reality. What does that mean? I could have a device on, and I would have my virtual, but I wouldn't lose this. I would still see all of you and be able to communicate, even though something else is going on in a virtual world. That's augmented reality, and it's combining a physical and digital worlds. But let me show you a couple of things that are going on in this world. One of them shows you where we're headed for something as easy as shopping. That's one of many that are out there that are coming your way. So every woman is saying Yahoo, and every guy is like, oh my God, I'm going to sit in the timeout area even a little bit longer when it's all done. But it's really cool when you look at the combination of the two worlds. How do we start to combine the physical and digital worlds? And I always joke, there's no stupider version of that than Pokemon Go. And you looked at Pokemon, and it was the best example. It was a digital game that required the physical world. And I put this up only because I think it's funny, and he talked about Pokemon, but it's a picture of Willie Nelson. Says, when we were kids, we didn't have Pokemon Go. If we wanted to look for things that weren't there, we got stoned like normal people. If you do not believe that it is a physical and digital world combined, that it's not one or the other, Amazon is probably the best example of it. So get your head around this. Amazon, an online book retailer, is about to open up 200 physical bookstores around the country. Again, an online book retailer is about to open up 200 brick and mortar bookstores. Smaller footprint, using all the analytics from their site to make sure they're only carrying the most popular selling items. Smart way to do business, but they are changing the game. It's not physical, it's not digital, it's a combination of both. And what you'll see with what Amazon is doing with groceries, it'll show you that they're going to reinvent the grocery experience as well.
Welcome to Amazon Go. Use the Amazon Go app to enter. Then put away your phone and start shopping. It's really that simple. Take whatever you like. Anything you pick up is automatically added to your virtual cart. If you change your mind about that cupcake, just put it back. Our technology will update your virtual cart automatically. So, how does it work? We used computer vision, deep learning algorithms, and sensor fusion, much like you'd find in self-driving cars. We call it Just Walk Out technology. Once you've got everything you want, you can just go. When you leave, our Just Walk Out technology adds up your virtual cart and charges your Amazon account. Your receipt is sent straight to the app, and you can keep going. Amazon Go. No lines, no checkout. No, seriously.
Very cool. And again, a combination of physical and digital and what those worlds look like. It's important for us in meetings because we tend to go way too hard one way or way too hard the other. It is not a complete digital world. It's combining the two to make that experience universal. A couple of myths I want to break up. This is my Truth Buster section or my Myth Buster section. A couple of myths in our industry that just aren't real. And here's the thing. We were talking about digital and physical. You need more proof. Vinyl record sales are on a tear. Vinyl record sales are going through the roof. We sold 12 million in 2015. We sold 16 million vinyl records in 2016. And here's the issue. Most people would probably be thinking it's the boomers and the Xers. They're trying to relive their youth. And no, it's the millennials and Generation Z that represent 50% of all vinyl record sales. It is a younger generation that is craving for something tangible when it comes to the music. If you remember, and if you're over 30, you remember albums, and you remember the artwork mattered, and we actually paid attention to the artwork, and it ended up on your wall because we were too poor to have art, and it ended up there in a frame, and that was our art. Or we bought crates, and we put all our albums on the wall, and people would come over, and they'd look through your album collection. And it was an honor for them to look through your collection. You weren't upset about it. And you think about missing something tangible today, you don't go to somebody's house and say, let me see your phone, I want to see your playlist. You don't do that. That is the shift that we are seeing, and it is a younger generation that is driving it. And again, a myth. We always think that certain generations work a certain way. Millennials are going to do everything online. We heard that. Meetings are going to be dead. They're never going to want to meet face-to-face. You know what our industry research tells us? Millennials want to meet face-to-face more than any of their peer groups at 93%. They travel 1.5 more times for business than any of their peer groups, 2.5 more times for leisure than any of their peer groups, and they're coming to meetings for professional development, mentorship, and networking. Sounds familiar. And as I said earlier, most of what we've learned about the millennials is wrong. What we've learned with the older millennials, when you separate them, they're not much different than every generation before them, except that they use technology more. Outside of that, their wants, their desires, and we always said they jump from job to job. There's no loyalty. Well, it's because it was a job. They were 24, 25, and 26, and they were in their jobs. They're now in their careers. And their careers are looking very similar to other careers of other generations before them. We really overthink it. And some of the best, to me, the best analysis here is we've had an explosion of travel agents in our industry. Travel agent bookings are up 20 million over the last 3 years. The largest users of travel agents and the largest growth group are millennials. Millennials are using travel agents. And we said they would never talk to human beings. It's just not true. It is the opposite, actually. And stop with the generations. We spend so much time talking about generations. Here's the one point I want to make to everybody. I always say generations as far as demographic studies. Demographics are dead. Psychographic matters. Study the behavior, not the age. This is where we get stuck or we get into our own way. And what do I mean by that? If I like mobile, I like mobile. It doesn't make me a 20-year-old. If I like video on demand, I like video on demand. It has nothing to do with my age. It has to do with how I want to consume content. So start focusing on the behavior, get off the age, and you will cover every age group. But we tend to focus on an age, and we say we're doing this because of the millennials. No, you're doing it because certain people like that behavior. And I always joke, I think I caution the hotel industry, because you hear it all the time. We're building hotels for millennials. You know what millennials do? They grow up. And when they grow up, their aspirations change. And I joke all the time, look, in my 20s, I would share a room with my buddies. In my 40s, I'm not doing it. It's a different part of my life. That's the thing. Things shift, and now that they're in their jobs, they may stay in traditional hotels. They may want that experience because they were exposed to it, because their parents traveled, because travel has been part of their life, their whole life. It's just a little dangerous to get stuck on the age versus looking at the behavior. Behaviors are what's really going to matter when it's all said and done. Here's a shot of Mark King. Listen to what he's saying, because it is focusing on the behavior and how we need to change it.
What point, when we keep changing, does it cease to be golf?
Yeah, but see, here's my thing. Here's my thing. I don't think you have to create a 15-inch cup per se or foot golf. I don't think you have to do that. I think the issue is that when somebody comes to the course, whether it's a public, private, municipal, whatever, the environment around the game is not very fun and inviting. So let me give you an example. Most country clubs, you can't wear jeans in the grill. You go to any really nice restaurant in San Diego on Saturday night, you can go in with jeans, no socks and some loafers, and a nice shirt like you have untucked. But you go to my country club, which is you can't do that.
That's true.
Why? Why? It's stuffy and it's old-fashioned, and we're hanging on to these traditions that don't make any difference.
Like, I've gotten to see Mark King, because we've been at some conferences together. There's usually a few F-bombs in there, so I'm really proud of him that he was keeping it clean, because he's that passionate. But that last piece, to me, is our industry at times. We're stuck on traditions that just don't make any difference. Some traditions matter. Some traditions don't, and you need to be able to separate the two. Everybody's having to change, and I'm going to end on that thought process as I started. You have to start changing your models and looking at it, and one of the best examples to me is the music industry, because you go back into the 60s, the Beatles would go on tour because they're about to release an album. And you look at what's happening today, an artist will actually release an album because they want to sell out a world tour. They no longer make their money on the albums. The only reason an artist used to tour was to sell the album. The only reason they release an album today is to sell the tour. That is a shift in the music industry. That is a shift in the dynamics. They'll make $100 million touring for the year. They're going to make peanuts when it comes to the actual music. That's what they're writing the music for today, is to set up the tour. That's a real difference. And I'm going to leave you with my favorite quote of all time. I will always end with this quote, but Alvin Toffler, he's known as a futurist, and this quote is really real simple. Illiteracy in the 21st century has nothing to do with your ability to read or write. It has everything to do with your ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And the reason I think this is so important, I think all of us as human beings and as an industry, we're great at learning, we're great at relearning, we're really bad at unlearning. We're really bad at getting rid of what we think we know. And if you're in a meeting and somebody brings a new idea and the first thing that pops into your head is it's never going to work, it's a silly idea, I've seen it before, you're illiterate in today's world. And I promise you, you're part of the 40% that's not going to be relevant in any significant way in the next 5 years, because you can't change fast enough. Your first thought has to be, how are we going to do it? The answer may be it's a silly idea, it's never going to work, but it can't be your first thought. Thank you for having me this morning. Anybody who wants the deck, just shoot me a note and I'm happy to send it to you. Thank you, sir. You need that? That's everything.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Dominguez, go! Big hand. Good job. That was outstanding. I am a big believer in some of you are visual, some of you are more auditory. Michael was just saying that we need to unlearn things. This is mental floss. When you think that you've got this stuff stuck in your brain and you can't unlearn anymore, something like this, would you like this one? There you go. That one's for you. There you go. Can I use that? That was just outstanding. Michael Dominguez, mgmresorts.com, mdominguez at mgmresorts.com, Facebook, Dominguez M68. Just outstanding. I've got a few announcements. For those of you that did not get a nose flute last night, I've been flooded with requests about these. If you did get a nose flute, stop by the Hyatt booth. I've got some more back there. For those of you that are thinking that when you go back to work that you just need a couple seconds to be able to process everything here, one of my new inventions are called Don't Bug Me glasses. You need to be able to recover and process all the information. And these glasses in and of themselves will help you be able to just take a moment, soak in everything from the MIC conference. And I bet that someone in this row, right there you go. Ryan, those are for you. There you go. All right, a couple more announcements. The luncheon today is in the Four Seasons Ballroom, which is just across the hallway with Sally Hogshead. Very amazing talk on fascination, one of my favorite speakers in the world. Governor Hickenlooper will also be there. The new breakouts this year used to be we went to the left and the right. We don't go left and right anymore. I don't know what that means. It's significant somehow. There's something political there. But there is no 500 series anymore. And if you go into an event room and it says nap, that's not to go take a nap. That's these childhood pediatrics people. Might be interesting, but you probably are going to miss some other great speakers. Breedy Exhibition Services, we want to thank them for their expo hall and signage. Big hand for those, please. Give them a big hand. Great signage. This is an amazing facility. Kind of hard to find your way around. But that's a great facility, though, seriously. Intro, image, video. Now, hang on just a sec. MIC would like to thank one of our diamond sponsors, Image Audio Visuals. Big hand for those, please. They've been the AV sponsor since the Meeting Industry Council began 15 years ago. They've worked tirelessly on behalf of Meeting Industry Council to make sure their needs are met. And for a speaker like me, the ability to simply give them the information that I need and the particulars of my audio-visual and not worry about exactly what happens next, that is a rarity in the business, and I deeply appreciate them. Multimedia and creative services, digital conference recording, webcasting, and event apps. They're a Denver-based company with offices in Denver, Aurora, Breckenridge, Copper Mountain, and here at the Colorado Convention Center. Again this year, Image and MIC are offering continuing education units through the recordings of the sessions. Make sure you get your additional CEUs at www.e-attend.com/MIC2017 starting next week. Thank Image Audiovisuals. Just one hand, more hand for Image Audiovisual. Thank you. If we can, please roll the image video.
Well, I think we look for all the participants in our clients' events as family, not typically vendors. Vendors to me defines there's a separation between what you would be doing and what we would be doing. When we come together, it's really a family operation and organization.
In an event partner, the most important thing to me is the relationship that gets developed.